Welcome to Beyond the Fundamentals. It's good to see you. Today, we want to talk for a second about stage 3 atheism and how stage 3 atheists are essentially disillusioned fundamentalists. We have done quite a few things on this channel with regard to stages of faith, stages of growth, okay? And one of the books we use, one of the models that we use, is a model put forth by James Fowler, and getting messages from people. And Fowler's model takes into account, Piaget and Kohlberg and Erickson and several others. And there's other things like integral theory, there's spiral dynamics, there's all sorts of different growth models. It's estimated that there's about 100 different growth models. We're pretty familiar, or people tend to be more familiar with the growth models that deal with children prior to reaching the age of majority. But what these growth models do is they assess consciousness and capability beyond the age of majority, okay? And that's one of the things. It's very important to understand this as an adult. They say as the child is to the adult, so is the adult to the sage. And the idea is that you want to get to sage stage of your reality. And one of the promptings that really helps to do that is to understand what they are. What are the levels of development? Okay. We have multiple different videos that talk about this. And not only the videos that you see on the screen here, but also many other videos mention this on the fly. So I don't want to get into what constitutes different stages of anything in this particular video, because you can go get that in these other videos, and I want you to see those, and I want you to understand that. I also want to do some more content on how important it is in a marriage or in a relationship, in a committed partnership, to understand growth and development models so that you and your partner, you and your husband or wife, can map out the growth trajectory that you are on and that you want to be on, and what to expect at each phase. So you'll know what's happening. A lot of times people happen like, oh, we just grew apart. Well, if we could analyze the relationship, I bet we could help you understand exactly what was happening. And if you were interested in keeping the relationship together, we could provide maybe a little bit of guidance on what needs to be worked on so that you don't grow apart if you don't want to. Okay. So a lot of times people just don't know what's happening. I think this should be required training before people get married. So this is a thing, but I have to say that the book title, Stages of Faith, it's misleading for a lot of Christians because they tend to mistake that for levels of Christian faith. And that's not what Fowler's getting at here. This is not stages of Christianity, okay? And the way he uses the word faith here is not the fervency with which you affirm all the propositions of the statement of faith and the systematic theology. It's not like that at all. It's more like a connectedness to the ground, what Tillich would call the ground of being, with regard to perception, capacity, awareness. So if you were to look at, it's also important to make this distinction. Spiral dynamics seems to focus a little more, at least at first, on awareness and consciousness, what you're aware of. Whereas Fowler's Stages of Faith brings into it not just awareness, but capacity, what you can do. And those two things are very important. When it comes to what you're aware of, maybe you're familiar with some of those progressive commercials where they're trying to help people stop turning into their parents. And then you have I don't know, they'll have some strange guy on there who's some random guy who is like, "Oh, I wonder what kind of logistics have to be in place for this warehouse to be able to operate like this," you know? And then Dr. Rick has to tell him, "Nope, nope, we don't worry about that." But that is to be able to concern yourself with that, to look at a storefront and to realize that there's something going on in the back end, like logistically, is a level of awareness. In the military, you think the military is all about fighting and tactics and shooting and how to shoot and how to kill and all that kind of stuff. And that happens very infrequently compared to the amount of logistical support that must back that up. So military is strategic. It's more about logistics and supply and logistics and planning than it is about acute level tactics. All the military movies, they show people out there, pulling the trigger, and that has to be done in a war. But what's really going on? How are they getting the what they call beans, bullets, and band-aids? How are they getting that stuff supplied to them, right? And if you really want to, if you study the history of warfare, you know that disrupting the supply chains is really how you get to them. And a lot of people die, like in the Civil War, Revolutionary War. You had a lot more people often dying from dysentery and poor field sanitation or lack of supplies than actually died from wounds sustained in battle. So there's an awareness. And as one time my kids asked me, my kids said, and they were small. There are these two daughters. They're adults now, but they had this idea that they were gonna start a hot dog stand, and they're gonna feed people for free, because it's just so much of a pain to have to pay for everything. They're gonna start a hot dog stand. They're gonna feed people for free. And so I'm like, I think that's fantastic. I think you should do that. Why don't you do that right now? And they're like, well, we need to get the hot dogs. Maybe we need to be older. No, you do it right now. Go ahead and do it right now. Where are you going to get the hot dogs? And then, like a new thought rattles around in their head for a second. And maybe they're thinking of somebody who's going to give them to them for free so they can give them out for free. I'm like, okay, who's going to give them to you for free? Who's going to make them for free? Why are they going to make them and give them to you for free? Are they slaves, or do they have to be paid? You see? And it was a teachable moment to get them to understand supply side economics, and that kind of thing is important. So it enhanced their awareness a little bit. So and you'll see this in politics a lot. Like the younger people who are more fervent and angry about everything, they typically just haven't thought things through. They haven't thought things through to the logical conclusion. And very often people want things, and what you want on the surface often isn't very bad, but it often creates second and third order consequences that harm things that other people care about. Okay? Probably the most famous one of these things, the most obvious one, is probably abortion. Because if you care about human life and you're trying to protect human life, somebody else cares about women's rights. They're like, well, your attempt to protect this harms my attempt to protect this. And so then if you're trying to protect women's rights, then it may bleed over and harm something someone else cares about, like the life of children. And so, but there's so many other things where this happens, and you have consequences, unintended consequences that have externalities that affect what you call the commons. It affects everybody. It affects everybody in a negative way. You might, for example, in an attempt to cure malaria, you might kill all the mosquitoes in a certain area but then that disrupts the food chain in a way that results in the destruction of all the crops, and a lot more people die from starvation than ever would have died from malaria. That actually happened. So there's cases like this. What's one? I forget which order this happened in, but they, I think over in Africa somewhere, they outlawed, poaching white rhinos. And so then, okay, and they put a really heavy fine on it. So then they started poaching silverback gorillas. Well, you see, just outlawing poaching white rhinos isn't the problem. It's probably a symptom of a problem. There's probably a deeper socioeconomic problem that could be solved. And if you could find a way for these guys to be productive and make plenty of money without having to go poach animals, maybe they wouldn't even be trying to poach these animals. So there are different things like this. Caleb says, reading some of Fowler's work after Stages of Faith, he continues to utilize the stages model, but often highlights the need for deeper communal and ethical dimensions of faith, emphasis on the dynamic process. Yeah, so in Fowler's book, he considers 7 different domains of consideration, but in reality, there's no limit to the number of domains that you can consider, okay? And so in my video on how I quickly assess someone's growth stage, I don't remember how many exactly I cover in there. I think it's at least 20, but the list that I have has 30 something on it, and I haven't even updated it in a while. But there's really no limit to how many things you could consider. Like if someone is stage 5, what kind of shoes would they buy? I mean, how many things, and then you have to decide what's relevant to consider. And there are some major ones. And one of the ones that's easiest to discern when people talk is something like how magical their thinking is, if they understand causality, and that's an awareness thing as well. And causality and magical thinking often go together for people. External or internal locus of authority, that is a huge one. Okay, and there are other metrics that clarify to me that a person is in an advanced stage, but if I were to tell it to you and you're not in an advanced stage, you would just think that they have gone off the deep end. So it's difficult to give examples to a broad audience like this, because people in the audience who are stage 3 won't be able to hear what I'm saying, because they'll just think that I'm advocating breaking rules, which that's not what I'm advocating doing. I wish, in alignment with Caleb's comment here, it would be very interesting to see how Fowler would rewrite his book after being exposed to the 4 kinds of knowing with John Vervaeke and some other things like that. Because that opens up a whole new realm. You hear people try to say this, like if you listen to Alan Watts, he died. I think his last radio interview was 1973. I think he died at the age of 58. If you listen to him, you can hear him trying to articulate the difference between words and reality. And he's saying the same thing that Vervaeke is saying, with the difference between propositional knowledge versus participatory, perspectival, and procedural, that kind of thing. You can tell he's saying the same thing. And even Jordan Peterson in his books before, because I watched the podcast where he got introduced to this way of thinking, the 4 kinds of knowing, and he very quickly latched onto it. But when you read his books before he got exposed to that particular way of thinking, you can see him making the distinction using different words. And it's harder to make those distinctions. But everybody makes those distinctions. If you ever go fill out a job application and ask you how much experience you have, they are differentiating between participatory, perspectival, procedural versus propositional knowledge. They want you to have experience plus book learning. So everybody makes those distinctions, and then for some reason they get all upset when you put labels on them like that. And one of the reasons is because it destroys one of their sacred cows. It's very easy to erect an idol out of nothing but words, because they're free. You can just say them, right? You don't even have to get, wood, hay, stubble, gold, silver, bronze. You don't have to make an idol out of any of that. You can make an idol strictly out of words, and we do it all the time. It's called systematic theology. It's just rearranged words. They're free words. You can put them in whatever order you want to. And when people wake up to the idea that propositional knowledge is like monopoly money, if it's not pointing at anything real, they suddenly realize that, wow, everything I've staked my whole being on is just false. It's just a house of cards. And that's exactly what it is. And that's why people reject a lot of it. One of the reasons I made this video about Paul's transformation model is because people are like, oh, you're going outside the Bible to get, Fowler's thing and spiral dynamics, those stage 3 people can't reason their way out of a paper bag. And so that's for them to let them know that the same concepts and patterns show up in Paul's writing very clearly. So they are Bible-based for those stage 3 people who have to have a Bible verse for everything. And they need that because they can't see clearly. So it's not their fault. One of the things you want to do is you want to see clearly. So when it comes to stages of faith, we're not talking about faith as in the affirmation of truth statements that you can't prove to be true. We're not talking about that at all. Okay. We're talking about fidelity, trust, and reliability, movement in love with wisdom, with fidelity, trust, and reliability toward a particular thing. And that particular thing may transcend your current understanding or your ability to perceive or your capability. And those 3 things are important to remember. It could transcend your understanding. So one of the ways you can mark your growth as you're growing is whatever your concept is of whatever the highest thing is, you can mark your growth into the next stage by your willingness to completely let go of that idea and recognize that it is wholly insufficient to actually interface with the thing, whatever it is. And that's how you can identify that. So stages of faith, is not stages of Christianity. It's stages of faith, which could be anything. So you can have stage 3, 4, 5, 6 Christians, stage 3, 4, 5, 6 atheists, stage 3, 4, 5, 6 Hindus, Muslims, Jainists, Sikhists, whatever there is, Hindu, Buddhists. You can have all the different stages of any different things. Doesn't matter. So these aren't stages of Christianity that we're talking about. And you can talk to if I talk to a stage 3 fundamentalist Christian, I'm going to be frustrated trying to find language that they can understand to represent my viewpoint. They're not going to be able to understand my viewpoint because I can perceive things they can't see and perceive. Everything's just going to come across as heresy to them. Okay. I can talk with a stage 5 Buddhist, Christian, atheist, and we all understand each other just fine. And there's no arguments, and we're not disagreeing. We understand certain things are different at a propositional level that aren't necessarily different at the real level. And the fact that we may label things differently doesn't really bother us. The stage 3 versions of things, I've said this before. Some people say, oh, religions lead to God. And the point that I've made on this channel before is that no religion leads to God. As a matter of fact, all religion, doesn't matter, fundamentalist Christianity, fundamentalist Islam, Hindu, Buddhism, whatever, all religion at the first half of life wisdom stage is designed to trap you into a hamster wheel of actions that lead nowhere so that you can wake up to the fact that you're going nowhere. That's the point, you see? That's the point. And the problem is, for most people, you can't you can't get there until you're on the hamster wheel for a while. That's just how it is. And it doesn't matter if the hamster wheel is blue, red, green, or orange. When Jesus says, no man comes to the Father but by me, I am the way, the truth, and life. No man comes to the Father but by me. It's kind of like keeping your balance on a bicycle. It's the keeping your balance aspect. It's not that bicycle. You see, it's you could do the same balance keeping skills on a bicycle, on a 10-speed, on a BMX, or on a motorcycle, okay, or on one of those old-timey bicycles with the big wheel in the front, the small wheel in the back. Do the same balance keeping maneuvers for any one of these. And it's the balance keeping that is the way, not the device on which it's done. If that makes sense. So if I'm talking to a stage 3 fundamentalist, I might be very frustrated in inability to understand them. But if I'm talking to a stage 3 atheist, I'm going to be frustrated for the exact same reasons, because the same God that doesn't exist, that the fundamentalist is promoting in their mind, is the same God that the atheist has decided fervently doesn't exist, and they hate them with their, all their heart and their guts and all that kind of stuff. So what's going on here? That's what I want to talk about. And I want you to try to understand this kind of thing. What happens when people become atheists at some point in life? It doesn't matter how old they are. And I'm not saying this applies to every atheist, okay? But I just want you to, I'm just going to talk for a few minutes. I just want you to hear me. I just want you to hear what I'm saying, okay? I'm going to turn this off for a second because I just want you to pay attention. By the way, if you want to support what we're doing, this QR code will take you to the donate page of Beyond the Fundamentals, where you can monetarily support what we're doing if you like seeing content like this. When I want to take you back, I want to use an example of a child. When a child is little, when they're small, they think of mom and dad as that's the world. Like, dad is Superman. He's the strongest man ever. And mom is the, smartest woman in the world. And one day, and that's your idea of dad and mom. I'm just giving you an example. It's like this inflated, we have these inflated attributes. Inflated specific attributes that we don't even know that we have. Okay? And so a child, they think dad's the strong, they think he can pick up a car and bench press a planet, right? Well, one day a day comes where they realize that dad's not the strongest man in the world. Wow, that's strange. This whole my dad can beat up your dad kind of thing. They realize dad's not the strongest man in the world. Maybe there's something going on that he can't pick up. Maybe he got to have two people help him lift something. Maybe his coworker's a little stronger than him, and you happen to see just whatever. You realize he's a guy like anybody else, and there's a lot of other men out there, and some of them are stronger or weaker than he is in various different ways, and he's just one of those people. Wow. And then you might see mom. You might think she's the smartest woman in the world, and then one day you see her struggle with a math problem that she can't solve. And you're like, oh wow, maybe she doesn't know everything. Maybe she's not the smartest person in the world. And you see somebody else solve the same math problem. I'm just using real rudimentary examples. But a child goes through what you might call parental differentiation, where they realize slowly and gradually that the attributes that they assign to their parents subconsciously aren't accurate. Okay? And what typically happens if the child grows up normally is they update their version of what constitutes dad, what constitutes mom. They update that model. You see? Oh, dad is, so just because dad can't pick up a car doesn't mean he's not your father. If you defined father as the guy who can pick up a car and bench press a planet, and then you realize that he can't bench press a car or pick up a car and bench press a planet. He can't do that. Then you might say, well, I guess Father doesn't exist. I believed in Father until I was 3.5, and then I learned that Father doesn't exist. And that's what atheists are doing. That's what stage 3 atheists have done. They, like the fundamentalists, they've defined God in a certain way that isn't real. They're both wrong about how they're defining the God that one of them believes in and one of them doesn't. You see? They're both wrong about that. And then if they stay stage 3, one person decides to double down on the belief in the God that doesn't exist, and the other guy decides that he makes the opposite end of the error mistake, that because the attributes I've assigned to this idea of God don't seem to pan out, then God doesn't exist. That's just like a kid saying Father doesn't exist if he can't pick up a car. Oh, Mom can't solve that math problem. I guess that means Mom doesn't exist. I believed in Mother for all these years, and I've defined Mother as the smartest woman in the world. Now that she can't solve this math problem, I guess there is no Mother. No, that's still your mother. Well, when a person grows up normally, they update their version of Mother. Mother is someone who maybe can't solve all the math problems. Dad is someone who maybe can't pick up a car. I've updated my map of Mom and Dad, of Mother and Father. You see? Whereas the stage 3 atheist has decided that since this man can't pick up a car, he's not Father. So they're sticking to a set of definitions rather than updating whatever it is that constitutes the thing, whatever it is. Are y'all following me so far? So Hudson down here says stage 3 atheism is Greek philosophy and Neoplatonism, metaphysics, perfect being philosophy. I don't know if that's not exactly a question. Is the whole thing a question? No, stage 3 atheism is the person who grew up Christian and then decides that there is no God because they got a job working in the NICU and they saw a bunch of babies suffering and decide that God is good all the time. They decide that God doesn't exist anymore. So now they are an atheist. Rather than updating whatever is at the top, their concept of whatever is at the top, whatever is most transcendent, they just assign the previous concept to God and decide that that doesn't exist anymore. So when you say Greek philosophy, that doesn't really mean anything because there's a lot of Greeks who had different kinds of philosophy. Platonism is actually different than Neoplatonism, and both of them are Greek philosophy. And then the word being, perfect being, well, is it a separate being? You see? What do you mean? What do you mean by being? No, not this one, the next one. What stage of atheism enables me not to think fictional myths are real? So this question itself would come from a stage 3 version of atheism, because they think that theism, or faith, if you will, the faithful, and I'm not picking on you, Shadow Slays. I don't know you. I'm not picking on you. I would say this of anybody, but this kind of question comes from, and it's not your fault that you've only been exposed to this. This is our culture. Our culture is that faith equals believing untrue things that can't be proven. That's what people think faith means. And that is not what the Bible means by faith. Okay? Faith is more like, and this is probably a bad example these days, but when you say I do at a wedding and you get married to somebody, you're exercising faith in somebody. You're moving forward in trust, fidelity, and reliability, ideally, with connection to other things and people, for the sake of something that you think is meaningful. That's what biblical faith is, right? It is not the affirmative belief in the imaginary, unprovable truth claims, which is what a lot of people think faith, and even a lot, and it's not your fault to another degree, because Christians are this way too. Christians also, they define their own faith. Well, I don't know that, grandma went to heaven, but I have faith. I'm like, that's not biblical faith. But, just believing truth, that's not the faith that Scripture's getting at. Okay, and we do have a lot of videos on this, like belief is nothing like you were told, or something like that. Belief is not what you think, something like, I forget what the title of that one is, but I think it has the word belief in it. And what's this one? Maybe some people just don't want to be in a cult. Okay, and that's another stage 3 atheist kind of thing to say. And I would encourage you to watch our video. It's a very recent video. You're either a cult member or a mystic. If you're interested, if you're on a seeking truth pursuit at all, you're either a cult member or a mystic. And I would agree with you that I don't want to be in a cult, but a cult is any group of people who share similar beliefs by definition. Now the connotative negativity that has come to surround the word cult is, people who maybe believe some kind of extreme charismatic leader who is capable of persuading people to do things that aren't in their best interest, like maybe drink a bunch of Kool-Aid or go to the Branch Davidian Combine down there with David Koresh. We think of things like that, Jim Jones. We think of things like this, but your fantasy football league is a cult. Okay, it's any group of people who shares beliefs. The Republican Party is a cult. The Democrat Party is a cult. Not in the derogatory sense of Jim Jones type stuff, but people who identify based on shared beliefs and values is a cult. Doesn't matter what it's for, by definition. Okay, and so I don't want to get into all that here because I have a whole other video we already did just a week or two ago, focused on that. Okay, so this Shadow Slays person here who's making these comments, and I'm not meaning this derogatorily. You're a product of your culture, and you're saying these things reactionarily to your exposure to stage 3 fundamentalist Christians. Okay, and so you're defining where you are based on something you don't want to be, where something you don't want to be is, rather than by where you are headed. A lot of that goes on within Christianity too, or professing Christianity, which we call churchianity, mammon churchianity, which isn't really Christianity. So this parental differentiation is the first thing I want to put into your mind when you have a stage 3 atheist like Mr. or Miss Shadow Slays here. Okay, what's gone on is they have come to realize that God as defined by fundamentalists doesn't exist. And they make the leap, just like a child saying, well, that means Father doesn't exist if he can't pick up a car. They make the leap that therefore God doesn't exist. Well, there's the problem with that. And what I don't want this to come across, I don't believe in apologetics. Okay? If you have to learn arguments to defend why you believe what you believe, you should not be believing those things. Okay? You understand me? If you ever have to study apologetics, you are not learning anything. You're being indoctrinated. Apologetics is all backwards. When people say you have to know why you believe what you believe, if you don't know why you believe what you say you believe, you have no business believing it. So don't profess to believe something that you don't know why you believe it. If Brother Melms told you to believe it, or if everybody in your family does and you're just on that team, maybe be honest and say that. Well, this is my people. This is our team. This is what we stand for. We believe the moon is made of cheese. And as we've said many times, in-groups they're adaptive. They help you survive regardless of the reason for why the in-group is together. So if you were to form a big, huge group of people that all thought the moon was made of cheese, the truth of the affirmations doesn't matter. The fact that you are a group still makes you survivable and adaptive. That's why back in the day, to be exiled from the city was a death sentence, because we need to be part of the group in order to survive. So we have, depending on which origin you want to go with, we have either evolved or have been designed, however you want to say it, doesn't matter to me, to latch on to group identities because those who didn't died. Okay, basically. One way to say it. So I don't like rivalry arguments, debates, that kind of thing. But for your own thought exercise, one of the things that an atheist will say, which we could use right back on them, at least a stage 3 atheist who's in this situation, and if Shadow Slays is still here and we haven't scared this person off, I'd ask them the same thing. So when you start talking to them, some of the more clever atheists will be like, well, you're somewhat of an atheist yourself there, fundamentalist Christian. It's like, what do you mean? I believe in God. Well, they'll be like, well, neither one of us believe in Thor or Odin or Valhalla or, the flying spaghetti monster, you name it. We don't believe in those. So since you don't believe in, which God should I believe in? You see? And then the conversation might devolve into a discussion about how you define God, which is a very legitimate conversation to have if you can do it in good faith and do it earnestly and not be trying to one-up each other all the time. And so in the same sense, if that argument works from an atheist to a fundamentalist, it also works from somebody who is not stage 3 back down to the stage 3 atheist. Like, well, hey, you don't believe in Thor, you don't believe in the fundamentalist God. That's fine. I don't either. I also reject the God of stage 3 fundamentalism. I don't believe in that God either. And so how do we define God? What is God? And you have to understand that as long as you are not God, whatever you can conceive of as God is necessarily not God. So one of the stupidest things humans have ever done, the stupidest things we've ever done, is try to write down what God is. Well, I've got systematic theology books sitting right over there trying to define God for you. And I got Mark Dever. It's the most idiotic thing a person can say. In his book, The 9 Marks of a Church or whatever, he's got an advertisement in there for a 6-week course on where you can learn everything there is to know about God. That's the dumbest thing you could ever say. That's literally the dumbest thing you could ever say. If whatever you can conceive of, as long as you are not God, as long as you don't have the qualia of what it's like to be God, then whatever you're conceiving as what it's like to be God is not God. That concept is not God. And every time you worship this external concept that you envision, you are committing idolatry. There's a big sky daddy up here in the sky. So that's why we have this on our thumbnail. We've got this image of, let me take away this QR code. Basically, I have a Hebraic Megazeus character here, and you'll notice that everybody down here is, let me get my pen out, or a laser pointer will work. Everybody down here is in black robes, and they all have these strings. It's like a Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade float. Basically what I'm looking for is like a sky puppet. You watch Monty Python, The Search for the Holy Grail, and this God character whose face kind of looks like this up here starts speaking from the clouds, speaking to King Arthur, telling him what to do. And when people think of God, that's kind of this big bearded man up in the sky. That's what they think of as God. And when you go from stage 3 to stage 4, you take a divergent path. If you become a stage 3 atheist, you recognize that the men in black robes are controlling this sky puppet parade float kind of thing, and it's not really God. It's just a thing supported, it's just a set of concepts supported by all these men and humans. And if you go the route of stage 3 atheism, you're like, well, that doesn't exist, therefore there is no God. You foreclose on the endeavor altogether while not knowing anything about the endeavor. Whereas the more mature route is to recognize that that's not God, but there's still something that transcends me. See? There's still something that transcends me. I don't know what that is. I do know that the way the men in black robes, or like Rudyard Kipling said, the gods of the copybook headings, leapt up to explain it once more. The way the men in the robes have defined this God, that doesn't match the nature of whatever God is. Whatever's at the top isn't that. Who or whatever's at the top isn't that. It's something else. So a more mature approach would be to, like, you update your version of dad to, yes, it is my father, but father can't lift a car. And now I'm not trying to talk to the attributes of omniscience and omnipotence. I'm not trying to say God can't lift a car. I'm not trying to say God lacks power or something. That's not my point here. Okay. So I need to have ears to hear and hear that. But you recognize that the God that you've grew up worshiping in American churchianity is a puppet erected by men and women over centuries. And that, in fact, is not actually God. So now what do? You're going to go through a phase where you deconstruct your worldview based on the presumption that that was God. Now, where do you go from there? Do you just turn over and say, well, there is no God? That's what the stage 3 atheist does. Or do you go over and say, well, let's update our model of God? And at first, the first few times you update your model of God, you're still doing these cataphatic things. God is this. A cataphatic, being cataphatic is to say what God is. God is omnipresent. God is omnipotent. God is, you say what God is. The more times you go through these phases where you update your concept of God, it turns the other way around and you become a little more apophatic, which is to understand what God is not. God is not this Hebraic Megazeus character that I've had in my mind this whole time. God is not this image of a person that I think I'm praying to, and I bow my head and say, dear Lord Jesus, thank you for this food. Dear Heavenly Father. That's the guy with the white beard. Jesus is the guy with the brown beard. You see, God is not those things. That's not God. No, I didn't want to do that. Everybody hear me okay? Got a little prompt from my microphone here. So in the same way that a atheist is going to say, well, you don't believe in these other gods, like Thor and Odin and those kinds of things. Well, okay, let's say that the God you disbelieve in is one of those. It doesn't mean that there isn't something at the top of the stack or at the bottom of the stack. You could think of God as the ground of being, or you could think of God as whatever is at the top of the hierarchy of values, at the top of the hierarchy of love, or the top of the hierarchy of wisdom, or understanding, or capability, or sovereignty. You can go in any domain you want to. Whatever's at the top of every domain is the thing. And so, if you are faithful, what that means is that you are moving in love, and love is that which enables choice. Love is not a warm, gushy feeling. Love is actions that result in generalized increased optionality. Like fitness, physical fitness gives you generalized increased optionality. There's more events you can participate in. There's more hikes you can go on. There's more group activities you can participate in. There's more mates that will be attracted to you. There's more employers that will be attracted to you. There are probably more days that you will live. You see, it's just being physically fit. It's not a limited set of menu options or one opportunity. The affordance of choice is that which results in generalized increased optionality. Actions. So love is actions that result in generalized increased optionality, like physical fitness or literacy or numeracy or linguistic fluency. Those kinds of things give you generalized increased optionality. You should always be working to expand your personality, expand and grow your personality. The more you expand and grow your personality, the more generalized increased optionality you have interactively in the world that we live in. So whatever's the next thing. So you think capability wise. So for example, I've got 3 balls here. Oh, one of them is green, so you can't see it. Let me get a yellow one instead. It was invisible. There we go. And I might be able to. I don't even know if I'm able. I can juggle a little bit, so I might be able to say I can juggle 3 balls, but juggling 4 balls is transcendent to me because I can't juggle 4 balls. Right. So that's a little bit outside my capability. See? Well, so there's a degree to which I can understand. What's the next level up? There's a degree to which I can see and perceive. What's the next level up? There's a degree to which I can do. There's a degree to which I can love. What's the next level up? And so faith is not the belief in the existence of a particularly defined being that has some kind of central location and recalls its memories and exercises its power in a particular way. Faith is dedication within yourself to, at the core of it, is love, actions that result in generalized increased optionality, which means you're going to have to build skill in multiple domains. Because if you love yourself and you love people, you're going to have to do these things in ways that result in this. And if you can do that, it means you have the wisdom to do that. Because you might have the intent to love, but without wisdom, it might have the negative consequence of not resulting in generalized increased optionality. Good intentions are, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, they say. And that means you're trying to do a good thing, but you weren't wise enough to understand what you were really getting into. So it turned out to not be such a good thing. So love and wisdom are conjugates in much the same way that frequency and time are conjugates, in much the same way that semantics and syntax are conjugates, or electro and magnetism are conjugates. They must come together. Okay? They always come together. Love and wisdom are conjugates. So faith is a commitment to, in as many domains, find domains that are somewhat meaningful to you for whatever reason, and commit to become better than you are, to transcend where you are in those domains because you currently perceive it to be meaningful to increase in those areas. Is it meaningful to be a better volleyball player? Is it meaningful to socialize with people well? Is it meaningful to be physically fit and have generalized increased optionality that brings into my life? You see? So faith is a movement with skill, wisdom, and love toward that which you perceive to be meaningful. And so you're constantly getting better. And that is what you should be doing because, by definition, you can do no better. What better thing could you do than to become better in the things that you perceive to be most meaningful? And you might say, well, what if my perception is wrong? What if I think that this is meaningful, but it actually turns out that this is? That's where experience comes in. That's where you learn through experience that, oh, this is not as meaningful as I thought it was, but this other thing is actually more meaningful. So then what do? You reorient yourself. You reorient yourself toward that which is most meaningful. And the thing that is the most meaningful, the thing that has the most understanding, the thing that has the most capability, the thing that whatever is the most wisdom, whatever is the most and the highest of every domain that extant, even the ones you can't think of, that's the realm of God. And we can't conceive of that. But what we can do is make micro adjustments to move toward it. And that's what faith is. That's what faith is. Faith is not the belief in the existence of some being that we can conceive of in a finite kind of way. Because by definition, there is a degree of conception, perception that is beyond yours. And whatever is ultimate is outside of your reach. But what you can move toward it. You can move toward it, move toward it, move toward it, move toward it. And the closer you move toward it, the clearer you can see. And you start to see a little more clearly. You start to see a little more clearly. And then your ability to orient yourself toward the meaningful, you get more skillful at that. There are bacteria out there that can't perceive anything that they can't physically be in contact with. And so if you are 10 millimeters away, if you're another piece of bacteria and you're 10 millimeters away from that bacteria, that is transcendent to you, is outside of their ability to perceive. You have to bring it into or move yourself into that which can perceive in the way that you can perceive. Now, the thing about us humans is that our ability to perceive is very plastic. It's very expandable. It's very movable. You can expand your ability to perceive. And the people who are latching on to every single word of a dogmatic, systematic theology, what they're telling you is that they can't perceive anything. They can't see anything. They can't do anything. They can't perceive anything. They need these things. It's like if you were in a dark room and you had to go through a maze in order to get to an objective and then make your way back to your people. What you might do is you might take a rope with you. And so you tie it up so that when you have to make your way back, instead of risking getting lost again because you can't see, let's say you're either blind or it's so dark you can't see, you might take a rope with you so that you can follow this rigid line and not have to see, right? Well, if you can see the maze clearly, like from the top, and it's obvious this is the path. If you can see it clearly, you don't need the rope. So the rope of systematic theology and dogma and statements of faith and stage 3 churchianity and fundamentalism and stage 3 atheism, the rope of these things makes people feel safe and secure in their ability to include and exclude things that are at their comfort level. I'm not comfortable with that. I will exclude that. It doesn't exist. I'm comfortable with this. I will latch onto it. That is my rope. I will hold on to that. And it's the same thing. So people are telling you, they tell you all the time where they are. You can hear somebody within, especially depending on what topic they're talking about, but you can tell within sometimes less than a minute where they are in their stages of faith, or at least whether or not they're stage 2, 3, or 4. There's lots you can tell. There's some people will give away within 1 to 2 minutes whether or not they have a cluster B personality disorder, but only if you know what to look for. So there's a degree of fluency that comes with these things. Excuse me. So I have in my comments here, I'm not in a debate with opponents. I'm in explore and discover mode. Somebody said to me recently, I posted something on Facebook or somewhere. And somebody fired back in heavy, vehement disagreement with whatever I said. And they said, you said this because your opponents, da 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 da. I'm like, whatever it is you're doing, if you're here to argue or debate or have opponents, that's not what I'm doing. I'm at the stage now. I'm at the not, no pun intended on the word stage, but I'm at the stage of my own development and trajectory now where I don't really care what other people think. And there is a degree, this might sound arrogant to some people, but I can see some things clearly enough to where I can very quickly dismiss what other people think. And if I can't, then it's worth exploring. And then once I've explored that in a way that's not egoic, in a way that's not rivalrous, in a way that is not becoming emotionally identified with or against it, but an earnest endeavor, then maybe at the end of that investigation, I have that added to my fluency of sight capability. We see through a glass darkly, but then shall we see face to face? I will know even as I am known. I really think the more I think this language is all through scripture, and we've just been interpreting it all the wrong way because we couldn't see. We're propositionally reductive, so we can't see the patterns behind what Paul's trying to tell us. So these people have certain things in common, like reductionistic materialism. A stage 3 fundamentalist and a stage 3 atheist, like shadow slaves here, they are both reductionistic materialists. Now, we did a video recently. I mean, very recently. We did a video, why nobody can exegete or exposit scripture. 3 hidden premises. And those 3 hidden premises are Cartesian philosophy, Newtonian cosmology, and propositional normativity. So our atheists down here, shadow slaves, what stage of atheism enables me not to think of fictional myths are real? Just like the Christian fundamentalist, Calvinist or provisionist, doesn't matter, they're the same. They both, the atheist and the Christian fundamentalists, they both are operating with Cartesian philosophy, with Newtonian cosmology, and with propositional normativity, and they're both in the left hemisphere. The atheist and the fundamentalist are subject to all of these. And the fundamentalist, like I said, could be Calvinist, provisionist. That's why I'm not super happy. I'm not super excited anymore when people just leave Calvinism and go to some other non-Calvinism that is just adjacent to what they were already in to begin with. So these 3 things affect their reductionistic materialism. So my next note down there at the bottom of that one slide here is this reductionistic materialism, which ties in with both Cartesian philosophy and Newtonian cosmology. What's happening now is people like Donald Hoffman, Bernardo Kastrup, and Roger Penrose, and many, many others, they're starting to see, and this goes all the way back to Max Planck and Schrodinger, where they stop the post-Enlightenment presumption that kicked off the scientific revolution was that matter is fundamental, and when matter evolves to a point of sufficient complexity, it can then start generating consciousness. And so consciousness has been seen classically since the Enlightenment, 1700s to the 1800s, as emerging from sufficiently complex matter. So if you have a rock or a pebble, maybe that's not conscious, but when you when enough cells in the primordial soup evolve into an amoeba, maybe that's conscious. Or then a creationist would say, well, when God designs something of sufficient complexity, that constitutes consciousness. Whereas if God designs a mountain or a rock, that's not conscious, but this other thing is. And we think that consciousness comes from the sufficiently complex, the necessary precondition of meeting a certain amount of complexity so that the organism can produce consciousness. And you'll hear them ask questions like, how does the brain produce consciousness? Well, there's an assumption built in there that the brain is what produces consciousness. And what they're finding out now is that's not the way it works. It's actually the other way around. And this is the endeavor of earnest, what do they call that? Not non-committed, but it almost sounds like they don't care. I forget what it's called. These brains are escaping my mind all the time. They're not pre-committed to a particular conclusion. And they're doing these earnest investigations, and what a lot of people are converging on the same idea, that what is fundamental is consciousness, and that space, time, and matter are all emergent from consciousness. We've either been designed or we've evolved, however you want to say it, to perceive reality in a particular way. But just like the bacteria that can't perceive the other bacteria that's 10 millimeters away from him, there are necessarily things that in base reality that we can't perceive because there's no need for us to. Okay? In other words, there's one mind. Donald Hoffman, from a scientific perspective, there's basically one consciousness. Bernardo Kastrup, from a scientific and philosophical perspective, there's basically one consciousness. Roger Penrose, Max Planck, Schrodinger, from basically the consciousness is the unified field that makes quantum reality possible. That's why we can have non-locality. We say, oh, these particles have non-locality. Whatever this particle does, which means they can communicate with each other faster than the speed of light, instantaneously, even though they're, hundreds of light years apart. Really, it's probably not what's going on. It's probably like instruments on a dashboard or bits on a computer, where instead of communicating with each other, they're communicating from something else, and they're both getting their marching orders from some unified thing that's beyond them. They're not communicating with each other. They're getting their marching orders from the same place. Hi, Divine Dissonant. It's good to see you, Laura. Welcome aboard. So Hudson says, is Einstein's cosmology stage 1? So a particular cosmology isn't necessarily any particular stage. But Einstein's cosmology is beyond Newton's cosmology. Newton saw everything mechanistically as like billiard balls. Once you rack the billiard balls, they're set in motion, and then everything plays out in accordance with a certain kind of thing. Okay, so your atheistic evolutionists and your Calvinists would see things that way. Einstein updated that to relativity. He struggled with the concept of quantum physics. Not struggled intellectually, like he couldn't grasp it, but when it comes to the implications of what was led to from the work of Planck and Schrodinger, it gets into philosophical implications, and you leave physics and you go into metaphysics. It's impossible not to. And so that's like a different thing. It's a head scratcher. Like, what do you do with that? What do you do with that as a physicist? It's very strange. And what you don't want to do is you don't want to use these things that are hard for the smart people to figure out as a way to smuggle Jesus in. Let me find the gaps where they don't understand things. Oh, that's God doing that. Okay. So he didn't quite go But Einstein did interestingly say, some people say he's an atheist, some people say he's a theist, and I think there's a statement where he said one time that I believe in the God of Spinoza. If there's a God, I think it's the God of Spinoza, something like that. That's another controversial character, and he was widely misunderstood. And you can get more about Spinoza from some of the letters that he wrote after being misunderstood from his works than from the works, because he had to clarify himself. He was kind of horrified at what people made of what he believed or what he was trying to communicate. So these things are held in common with the atheist and the fundamentalists. Cartesian philosophy, Newtonian cosmology, propositional normativity, and left hemisphere dominance. Those things are all there with the Calvinists, the provisionists, and our stage 3 atheists. So that's kind of what I wanted to get to today. I want to take a couple minutes now and look at some comments that we have from some folks. What kind of comments do we have? And put the QR code back up there in case you like what you're getting. That QR code will take you to the donate page at Beyond the Fundamentals. And if you like this kind of content, we can't do it without you. So where can we get some good comments from? What a spicy yet luminous title for this. It's good to see John here. Somebody's talking about the music. Lolasaurus Rex says, reading James Fowler's Stages of Faith on your recommendation is one of the best things that I ever did. Well, I appreciate you sharing that. And so I'm going to use that as an opportunity to recommend it to everybody else. Get your hands on this. Don't take it as a Bible necessarily, but take it as one person's attempt to try to understand human stages of development beyond age of maturity, age of majority. And take it as a starting point. Take it as a starting point to kind of gain your own fluency of what it means. And you might need to read it a couple of times. And I'm also thinking about putting together some classes based on this book to help people understand it better. So I guess y'all can let me know if you'd be interested if we did classes on that book so that it could be better understood. But I don't want people to think that we take it as the Bible. It's just one guy's endeavor to understand. Where are we now? Let's see. We did Caleb's comments. If y'all got comments or questions, put them in there. I'm going to try to get to them now. Try to get to the comments and questions right now. We looked at, let's see. We looked at Caleb's comment. Yep, we looked at that one. We looked at shadow slays. Maybe some people just don't want to be in a cult. Is a really good example of a stage 3 atheist here. That shadow slays is. So I'm glad that person was here because they're exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about. Josiah says, we don't want to be in a cult either. Jesus didn't start a cult, by the way, aka a path. JB says, I'm excited for this one. The way, the truth, and the life. Hudson says, stage 3 Okay, we already solved that one. Roddy says, stage 3 atheism and stage 3 fundamentalism seem to read and understand the Bible with the same stringent hermeneutic. Yes. If you were to take this comment over here about, fictional myths. You told me you believe in a talking snake, this kind of thing. And so Roddy's absolutely right, where that the conversation with a stage 3 atheist and a stage 3 fundamentalist takes place down at the same base naive level of kinds of things. Brian says, to be fair, they only know by experience what Christianity is by those who say they are doing it. So instead of seeing it, if what he sees is correct, they assume it is and throw it out. That's a good point, because that's the point I was trying to make earlier, is that I'm not trying to bash shadow slays here, because he also is a product of our culture, and the Christianity to which shadow slays is exposed is also a product of our culture. And so if you were to investigate Christianity and all you investigated was stage 3 Catholics and Protestants, you would walk away disillusioned and could quickly dismiss them all as not having any idea what they're talking about. And you'd be right about that. Okay. But to then take the leap forward, it's a rather unintelligent leap to continue the leap forward to say, well, there's nothing transcendent at the top that is metaphysical. Well, that's a little too far of a leap. Hudson says, I believe atheists grow up with their hyperview of God, Calvinism, IFB. IFB stands for Independent Fundamental Baptists, like a child does with their parents. Instead of repenting and changing mind, they reject God instead. Yeah, that does happen a lot. You get, I know a lot of people, atheists now, who used to be Calvinists and who used to be Independent Fundamental Baptists. I say a lot. I mean, anecdotally, it's a lot for me considering. And once they realize, and I think Tyler Vela would probably fit in this category too. Once he realized that the God that he conceived of doesn't match the nature of reality that's being experienced, then you just say there is no God, or throw out Christianity without realizing that it could be pointing to the ultimate reality in a way that you didn't realize before. Which is what happened with me. My previous understanding of scripture. I mean, one time I waved around my Awana Excellence Award. I've memorized a lot of scripture. I'm familiar with a lot of the Bible. And you would think, oh, that's a wonderful, good thing, right? Because of the double bind and all that. But so much of it is tied to a stage 3 fundamentalist understanding that still, even though I know that as a fact, it still blinds me to what the Bible's trying to say. And sometimes things knock it loose for me. Like not long ago, Nick, who's been on this channel many times, he said something about Ephesians 4 that really knocked some things loose for me and like really helped me see something clearer. So that was very helpful. And so that I feel like the fundamentalist background that I had was a sufficient and necessary cocoon from which I had to hatch and come out of. But at the same time, it has left me with some blindnesses or blind spots or presumptions that I'm still discovering and still struggle with. Josiah says, statistically speaking, flying is still the safest way to travel. No, that's from Superman. He says, statistically speaking, if you're a pastor's kid, you're more likely to leave the faith. The status of the American church is lukewarm and stuck in stage 3. Yeah, I would say it's to the degree that I don't consider stage 3 churches to be churches anymore. You know, people say, well, I'm going to help me find a good church. This church taken over by a pastor. I'm like, look, you might as well go to the nightclub and get drunk. You'd be better off doing that than going to what you think is a church, because at least you wouldn't be fooled that it's good for you, and you know you'd be impairing yourself, and you'd be a step ahead of the game. Religious fundamentalist ideology is not just as impairing as alcohol, it's even more impairing than alcohol, and it brings with it the feeling that you are doing something good, righteous, virtuous, moral, and just by adhering to these things, but it is just as much of an impairment. It's even more of an impairment and an addiction, preventing you from seeing and interacting with reality, and leads to cynicism and nihilism. Same effects. Christian fundamentalism has the same effects on a person's life in general as addiction can. I know people right now who they never drink, they never cuss, they never do any drugs, and their financial situation, the degree to which they have agency in the world, is just as if they've been drunk their whole life. Because they've been drunk on ideology. They've been drunk on propositionally reductive dogma. Brian says, Thomas Brennan, you might like this. So, Thomas Hincapi Hurtado. I don't know if this is a dumb question. Well, we're going to find out. But in what way is it good, if it is, to share historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus? That's an interesting question. There is a book called the verdict of history that shares 17 different original source writings, not Josephus, that corroborate the existence of Jesus. And then there are, and then there's the evidence that demands a verdict, Josh McDowell type stuff. This is what's called evidential apologetics. Okay. And evidential apologetics is very much a product of a post-Enlightenment way of thinking. In other words, we are doing our sense-making the way we've been programmed to, in accordance with the Cartesian philosophy, Newtonian cosmology, propositional normativity, and left hemisphere dominance that we got from the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. And to endeavor to undergo evidentiary apologetics. In other words, I will show you the evidence for why the claims of the Bible are literally historically true. Comes from this mindset. Now, do not hear, I'm not saying that the historic things in the Bible are not literally true. That's not what I'm saying. But I will say that if you look at the way Jesus did things, okay, sometimes it's a little different than how we think of evangelism. We think of evangelism as putting information into people's heads, okay? And sometimes Jesus would say some strange things like, if any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. What do we have this? We have doing coming before knowing. Do, he shall know. If, so it's a contingent word. If, it's a contingency word in English and Greek. Ein. Make sure, yeah. Hang on. If any man will do, so doing comes first, and then the knowing, the epignosko, or the phronesis, or, whatever you want, or gnosko, comes afterward. Let's see, what is this? This is gnosko. So it's stored knowledge, not phronesis type exercise knowledge. If any man will do his will, he shall know. So the first thing I would say is that the way Jesus operated is that doing came before knowing. And that's very interesting. And the way we do things, when we're propositionally reductive, because of this down here, okay, propositional normativity, and our and also the presumption that materialistic reductionism, we're presuming that if I can prove the physical matter of the thing in a post-Enlightenment way of thinking, then that person will come to mentally affirm the truth of what it is I'm trying to say, and then we can say that they are saved. So you can do that. Now there's other people who fervently believe in the Bible is true, but they don't necessarily, and I'm not advocating for this, but they don't necessarily think that the man Jesus of Nazareth is really what it's getting at. And they kind of don't care if he exists at all. There's one that Christos is an oil that gets secreted in the body, and everything in the Holy Land is an esoteric representation of anatomical things, and you have to do certain things in accordance with the lunar cycle, and then that's what constitutes salvation. There's all kinds of weird stuff. There's another group of people who think that the concept of Jesus Christ is it's all a metaphor for what comes to psychedelics. They're talking about the sacred mushroom and the cross or something like that. I think I got a book over there that's entitled that. I haven't even read it yet. It's just on my list, and I'm aware of it. There's a PBS documentary special called From Jesus to Christ, which talks about, from a secular perspective, with no presumption that Christianity is true at all, how Jesus went from being Jesus of Nazareth to being this Christ figure. Okay? Am I saying you should believe in all that? No. What I'm saying is that it's helpful to be aware of the different perspectives that people have. If we presume that affirmation of the literal truth of something is what makes somebody saved, it's not that I'm speaking against the literal truth, a little historical truth of the fact that it really happened. I'm not speaking against that at all, but I don't think that affirmation of it constitutes salvation, nor do I think it's necessarily a good starting point to start with the propositions. I kind of think that starting with the actions and letting those actions lead to the propositions in that person is a better way to go about it. Participation first. Same way you learn as a baby. Participation. The four kinds of knowing: participatory, perspectival, procedural, propositional. Propositional is the shallowest kind of knowing. It's the currency of knowing. And sometimes currency is counterfeit. It's just monopoly money. Doesn't really point to anything real. The deepest kind of knowing is participatory. So if we are really interested in evangelizing, what we want to advocate for is participation first, and then let the propositions fill in. Then let the perspective come, and let the procedure come, and then let the propositions fill in, which they will fill in on their own. If we start with propositions first, even if the propositions are true, they might never link up to participation for the person, and they can be just as easily disabused as those propositions as otherwise. So we want to, like the psalmist says, taste and see before we tell and know. So everything that we say should not be because we've studied the evidential apologetics from, Sean McDowell or Josh McDowell. It should be participation first. And when we speak to people, if we're speaking from participation first, it will have a genuineness to it that you can't replicate with any amount of apologetics, evidential or otherwise. I could be wrong about this, but I think there's another section like this in John chapter 3. He that doeth truth cometh to the light, that his deeds may be made manifest that they are wrought in God. Now notice doing comes before light perception. Now this is the same guy, if I go to the Bible over here, this is the same guy that said, this is that true light which lights every man that comes into the world. Just 2 chapters earlier, think of the writer of John writing things as he's writing on purpose. Michael Heiser said, you should read Bible like you're reading fiction, not in the sense that you think it's false, fiction in that sense, but in the sense that when you read a fictional author, you presume that the author has arranged everything he's telling you on purpose for a reason. Like everything's there because it's part of the story. And so, yes, that is the true light, which lighteth every man that cometh into the world. In Proverbs 20:27, the spirit of man is the candle of the Lord. But to come to that light, to realize that light, maybe doing the truth comes first. So I have shifted my mechanism of evangelism away from trying to convince people of the propositions first and looking at patterns of action first. Go with patterns of action. And remember doctrine, if we go back to the other one that we saw. If any man will do his will, he will know of the doctrine, whether it be of God. The doctrine we think of in churchianity is propositionally normative. We believe that. The doctrine in Scripture is action. It's participation, movement. Biblically sound doctrine is participatory, not propositionally reductive. Tracking so far? So I would say that if I'm evangelizing, I don't, and you can use Jordan Peterson as a good example of this, because Jordan Peterson was we've gotten to watch his transformation in public. And so he went from a person who basically thought that Christianity was false, or like not literally true, just stories that maybe have a psychological component to them. And over the years, he has transitioned into a person to where he thinks that the resurrection of Christ, there's a lot of reasons he thinks this after endeavoring to discover this for years and years, searching out reality. He has come to the place now where he thinks that the resurrection of Jesus from the dead is absolutely the most fundamental truth ever on the planet. That if anything's true, that is the most fundamental thing that is mostly true. Now, if you would have just gotten him there through evidential apologetics back when he was in his 20s or something like that, he wouldn't be there now, and he would have been inoculated from getting there how he did later. So there's certain fruit that you can't pick before it's ripe. And now you could never talk him out of this. You could never talk Jordan Peterson out of the idea that he's arrived at, that the literal resurrection of Jesus from the dead is the most fundamental truth of the universe. You can't talk him out of that now. And so the question would be, what can we, like, first of all, have you come to that realization yourself? Are you believing a set of propositional statements that your in-group pats you on the back and says, good boy for believing? Or have you really come to see this for yourself? And if you haven't, shut your mouth. Just shut your mouth. Let it be. And when it comes to you, the same way that it came to Jordan Peterson, then maybe talk about it. But if we're just repeating things that we've learned from Josh McDowell and Lee Strobel, shut your mouth. Because you don't have an inside-out participatory firsthand gnosko of the doctrine, whether it be of God or not. So stop trying to spread something. And I'm not getting onto you, Thomas, because I don't know where you're coming from. I'm just saying this in general. Fundamentalist Christians, stop trying to spread something for which you have not had a Jordan Peterson moment yourself, or a Road to Damascus moment yourself. Stop trying to spread that using words and monopoly money to get people to affirm to something for which they've never had the experience either. So what we're trying to do is work with people and cultivate a way for them to, through actions, if any man will do his will, do some things and come to see this for yourself. Then the propositions will follow. Hudson says most Calvinists have a God complex, or as the way Doug Gustafson says, they're borrowing power from God in order to say what they say. So when they make statements about God's omnipresence or omniscience or sovereignty, basically they put it out to where if you disagree with them, you disagree with God, like they have the power to speak for God. Of course they do. Stephen G. Many ex-fundamentalist atheists have left Christianity but keep the fundamentalist reflex. That's a good way to say that. They still have that fundamentalist reflex. What else do we have? What other comments do we have? I've been watching some videos from pastors who deconstructed and are now atheists. It's amazing how many things we can agree on, but I don't understand their conclusions that there is no God. Yeah, they're stage 3 atheists is the problem. Have you read the book Phenomenology by the Spirit by Hegel? No, I have not. Josiah says, my pastor keeps using the phrase God's providence and God's sovereignty. Now, in his sermons, they hired a new pastor, and I believe he's a stealth Calvinist. He never used those words much any before. So let me tell you what, Josiah, you're in a stage 3 Mammon church, and even if you get rid of the Calvinist pastor, it's still going to be these 3 things all day long, okay? Well, how can I get in a good church where the guy's not saying God's providence and sovereignty? It's still Cartesian philosophy, not the Bible. It's still Newtonian cosmology. It's still propositional normativity. It's still materialistic reductionism. It's still left hemisphere. Even if you get a provisionist pastor, it's still going to be the same thing. Okay, so you got to stop. You got to stop looking for advanced doctoral classes in the second grade because they're not there. They're not there. All right. I'm not trying to get on to you with my tone. I'm just trying to make that clear for everybody, because if you're in a church where you're toggling and you think you're, even if your pastor isn't a Calvinist, if you are stage 4 or beyond, you have no, that is not in your proximal zone of development. They have nothing for you there. Okay. The old pastor is being influenced by the new one. Sermons are slowly starting to sound more Calvinist. Yeah, that's not a church. That's not a church. It's a place of ideology. Systematic theology seems like you didn't finish the sentence. Lonnie Stoltzius. I find fundamentalism is more deceptive than alcohol. Alcohol knows what he needs to do to get better. A fundamentalist thinks he's doing right to help him, and it's hurting. Exactly. That's exactly what I was trying to say earlier, and you said it pretty well here. That's exactly what's happening. The alcoholic knows he's got a problem. At least I hope he does. Whereas the fundamentalist, his deception and addiction and delusion and insulation from the ground of reality is something that he thinks is helping him, and it's not. It's separating him. Thomas says, do you think that saying that salvation is gained by affirming propositional truth is similar to the Gnostic model of salvation? I don't think that's the way to go, but there's not the Gnostic model of salvation. Gnostic, when you start talking about Gnosticism, people start thinking of very specific beliefs that certain Gnostic had, like there's an urge and a demiurge. Gnosticism is the means by which knowledge is gained. It doesn't matter what the beliefs are that are associated with that. What that means is that there are lots of different kinds of Gnosticism, okay? And really any kind of epistemic endeavor is a type of Gnosticism. It's a type of gaining knowledge, and it has a philosophy of how knowledge is gained. If you believe that you can read a book and learn what you said, that's a type of Gnosticism. Okay, you see what I'm saying? It's functionally. So there is not the Gnostic model of salvation. There are many different Gnostic models of salvation. There's many different versions of Gnosticism. Like there's different denominations of Christianity, but some of them are as different from each other as different major religions are. Do you think that thinking that salvation is accomplished by affirming a set of propositions is similar to the Gnostic model? Okay, he asked that twice. We've already asked that. He says tracking. Thanks. Josiah, may you please do a video on evangelism only? I know it's not your niche, but it would be awesome to hear your thoughts and possibly tips and methods. I haven't read this comment before, but it kind of seems like we kind of just did. And then he says, street evangelism, like one-on-one encounters. Okay, there's a problem with this, because what are you trying to accomplish with street evangelism? Where are you going to be operating in street evangelism? The only place you can operate is in propositions. That's the problem, okay? That's the problem with propositions. When Jesus said, when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren, he said that to Peter after he'd been with him for 3.5 years, okay? Jesus didn't tell people to come up here and believe the certain set of stuff. He told the fishermen, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. Well, how long does that take? Okay. If you look at the movie Ip Man 1 and 2, pretty good movies in their own right. But if you look at how these Kung Fu masters gained disciples, it's the way Jesus had disciples was probably something more like that than the way we do church today. A little bit of food for thought, something interesting. So one-on-one encounters is necessarily going to be propositionally reductive, and that is not a good way to enter into the faith of the way that is Christ. So this whole Steven Crowder change my mind thing, this kind of whole thing that Charlie Kirk was doing, where he's encountering people. You may have these encounters with people, and you may or Ray Comfort, you may have encounters with people, and you may say a whole bunch of all things that a lot of people would agree are true, but you might decades later come to the realization that you were inoculating them from the truth that they could have gotten if you'd have spent a little more time doing the Jesus style of things. If any man will do his will, he shall know of the doctrine, whether it be of God or whether I speak of myself. I used to be really big into this, like, here's how to say it, here's where to go, here's how to answer objections. And it was all this propositional stuff, all this kind of debate level stuff. And here's the answers, here's the questions, here's the stuff. And I even had this big chart, the evangelism wheel, and I had all these things all mapped out. And there you could learn how to do it and what to say and the passages to go to. And frankly, I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed. Like, Paula and I talk all the time about how embarrassed we are today at so many of the things that we did in the name of our religion yesterday. Let's say yesterday, like yesteryear. What's next here? Russell, I've always understood Jesus to mean those who do good, whether spoken or done, are inclined to truth, whether spoken or done, since you can't have goodness without truth. Or can you have truth without goodness? He says, what it seems to me you're saying is similar to Luke's version of receiving the word of God, but the seed on good soil stands for those with a noble, good heart who hear the word and retain it. Something like that. Something like that. What Jesus says about the soils, the parable of the soils, actually applies to salesmanship or anything. A lot of what Jesus said, there's a lot of things in the Bible that it's helpful, especially when it comes to marriage, it's helpful not to think of them as like divine dictates from God, but rather someone who knows how the world works explaining to you how things happen. Like Matthew's principle. The Pareto distribution is the Matthew principle. To him who hath much shall much be given, to him who hath little shall be taken away. The people who accomplish the most, like Joe Rogan has the most famous podcast. I don't know if he still does, but at one point he did. And so he's going to get the most guests, you see? When you have more, you get more. He's explaining to you how things work. He's not telling you the way God does things, depending on how you define God. And now we're back to the premise of this whole video. Steve says, I predominantly go to church for my kids' life to help build a foundation as anyone else places of community. Now later he says, sorry for the typos. So we're gonna try to read through the typos here. Those of us don't personally attend church. So if you go to church for your kids, I would say that it's really important for them to have an example of a genuinely wise elder in their life, so that they don't think that understand that they should graduate from the church's way of thinking the same way they graduate from thinking about Santa Claus. And do not think that the pastor of the church is the pinnacle of spirituality. They need to understand that they need to grow out of the pastor's way of thinking between the ages of 16 to 24, somewhere around there. If they understand that, then church can be a pretty good cocoon. But if they think that that's permanently where you must always be in order to be in God's will, that can be a huge problem. Brian, what I see is a network of systems that develop that leads sure fictitious separation from God. I guess you're talking about churches here, like churchianity. Steve says, sorry for the typos. So Thomas says, thanks for all the help, the information, the wisdom for helping us thinking outside the box, getting good perspective. And I'll go through and think about the things you said. I appreciate that. Appreciate that feedback. And thanks for the comments, because I wouldn't be able to talk about these things if it wasn't for the prompting of your comments. And the comments and the questions you guys are submitting are really good, very thought-provoking. Stove, I think I said Steve earlier. Has anyone else found places of community, and if so, where? That'd be a good thing to put in the comments. I found a place here in Baton Rouge called the Red Shoes, and it's not a church, but it's a place where you can go talk to people who are past stage 3. There's people there doing beyond stage 3 stuff. The problem is, when you're past stage 3, there is the lack of rigidity is there's a lot of things that are adjacent to it. There's also people doing weird things there with crystals and new age and other stuff, but there's also like little book clubs where you just read a book and talk to people who are like in second half of life, who aren't, stapled down to a particular fundamentalist viewpoint. There's different things you can do there, and you kind of have to pick and choose what you think will help you and what you think won't. What's your proximal zone of development? So this question here, I want to encourage people to reverse the question. And so instead of thinking, when we think of the old way of thinking about church is to find a place with good doctrine, or some people, maybe they like good programs for the kids or whatever, they really don't care about doctrine. But if you're on this channel, chances are you probably were at some point concerned about good doctrine. So you're going to go to a church, you're going to look at the statement of faith, you're going to look all this stuff over, you're going to make sure they're right. So the right church, okay? And the idea is that a right church is a right church. Doesn't matter where you find it, where you go, a right church is a right church. I'm trying to find a right church. Well, the second half of life wisdom way to look at things be like stage 3 is first half of life wisdom. Stage 5, second half of life wisdom. Stage 4 is like the liminal place between the two. So in second half of life wisdom, you're not looking for the right place. You're looking for the place that's right for you. And I don't mean like propositionally right. What I'm looking for is something that's in your proximal zone of development. In other words, if you were going to a school, let's say you're transferring to another school and you're in the 3rd grade. Well, what's the equivalent of the 3rd grade at this other school? What do they call that? Right? And if your school only goes up to the 3rd grade and you're done with the 3rd grade, maybe it's time to find a place that teaches 4th grade stuff or that's doing things. You see, so it's important to do an assessment of yourself, and I can help with that, of where you are developmentally, and then you're going to ask, what kind of places in my proximal zone of development so that I can, what do I need? And the problem, if you got a family, what you need might not be what your family needs, might not be what your wife needs. She might need something that's a little beyond where you are, you see? So you want to ask, what are my needs spiritually? What do I need to grow and develop? What do I need? And after you answer that, only then can you start asking the question, now where can I find that? Because the old way of doing things, where's the right place? That doesn't work anymore, okay? Because that's not going to be in your proximal zone of development. Yeah, you're going to go find a church that maybe it's not Calvinist, okay? So it's right, okay? It's still not right. It's not where you need to be. It's still stage 3. It's still Cartesian, Newtonian, propositional, materialist, reductionist. It's still all those things. It's not right in that sense. So do a self-assessment, Stove. Find out where you are in your growth and development. Like if you look at stages of faith, what are we? Stage 4, stage 5, and then you can start to look for what kind of community will help me develop from there and move forward. And maybe it's going to be an Eastern Orthodox church. That doesn't mean all the Eastern Orthodox churches are good for everybody, you see? Maybe that particular one is helpful for you. Maybe you'll even find a Catholic priest who can really help you along in your journey. Like, I'm not Catholic at all. There's a lot of things I disagree with about Catholicism, but there's certain things that Richard Rohr brings to the table. And of course, he's on the outs with Catholicism, a lot of them anyway. There's certain things that he says that I found very helpful, that have been very expanding. But it doesn't mean that I think the Catholic Church is the way to salvation or anything like that. You see, it's like, is there something there that I can use? And if there is, go get what you can use for the time that you can, and then it may be time to move on at some point. Go in the world, make disciples, not mere believers. Yeah, and if you update the concept of believer to be some like Noah building the ark by faith, he moved with fear and built the ark. That's really what a Bible believer would be: somebody who embodies the gospel, not somebody who just affirms the facts of it. Would be what a real believer in accordance with the Bible would be. Hope for Everyone says, I think apologetics could come in handy when being approached with a wide range of questions. Granted, sharing your experience is the best course, and these interactions are far from simple. So, if you're talking about practicing apologetics, then I think that there is some value in having dialogue with people. If we're trying to defend propositional statements of something is that, I don't think that's super helpful. If you are just doing apologetics, and that's better than if you have to learn apologetics. If you have to learn apologetics, like if you have to take a class to learn how to defend something, no, stop right there. Only defend what you participatorily know. See? Do not defend what you only propositionally know. Don't try to. Don't feel like you need to. Don't go there. So if you never study apologetics, but you only defend what you know propositionally, okay? So what do you mean propositionally? Okay. I mean participatorily. Only defend what you know participatorily. I could tell you what the pool in my backyard looks like right now. I can tell you on the side there's a couple tiles missing that need to be replaced. How do I know that? I can defend the reality of what I've seen because I've been there. I've looked at it. I've examined it. But if someone just told me that and I didn't know it, I would not go through the motions of trying to defend it. I would just say, well, they said this. I don't know that that's the case. I haven't seen it, but that's what they said. So when it comes to apologetics, think very carefully about what you're trying to do. And if you're trying to defend a set of statements that your in-group believes, but you haven't participatorily come to see and perceive as real yourself yet, and don't be self-deceived about that, then it's an exercise in futility. Russell says, I just joined at the end. Haven't heard the entire video. Welcome aboard. Good to have you. And then Jurgen Solomon says, thank you, Kevin. Have to do. Appreciate your ministry. I think he means have to go. Probably a typo. And Stove says, appreciate the thoughtful feedback. Thanks. All right. Y'all let me know if I wasn't really planning on doing like a whole question answer thing here, but it's kind of fun and I like the comments and I thought the comments were really good. So I appreciate everybody who participated in the comments, and everybody seems to be pretty more or less cordial and here for the right reasons. So I really appreciate that as well. That's been a lot of fun. Right now, I'm going to go ahead and end this. If you want to support us financially, you like this kind of thing, please go to the QR code places and do so. That's very helpful. Can't do this without you. Thanks for watching. May the Lord bless you and good day.